So, why is Mary called Queen of Heaven? Welcome to Gracefully Catholic. If you're new here, go ahead and hit the subscribe and ring the bell to be notified of all our content. We usually post on Tuesdays and Fridays each week. Today I'm going to be talking, because it's the month of May, about the Marian title, Mary, Queen of Heaven. Now, I'll have a link over here. About a week ago we had a video on the various titles of Mary, and it did get into that some as well, so that way you can go and watch that as well. And there'll be links down below for that, along with every single person who takes part in this channel's other YouTube channels. Now, Mary has a lot of titles, and some of them are ones where they were done during earlier times, which were much more into poetic languages, so if you use it and a Protestant looks at it and goes, that seems like a bit over the top, it's because they used a bit over the top language. Sometimes it's something where most people don't understand that all the official titles for Mary are given to her solely because of how it reflects on Christ Jesus himself and not her. Mary, Queen of Heaven is one of these titles, as saying that Mary is Queen of Heaven is saying that Jesus is the King of Heaven. Now, that seems weird to us because in modern times, pretty much any royalty that we know about, the Queen is the King's wife. But back in ancient Israel in Judah, the king had numerous wives, and therefore it wasn't either all 100 and some wives of Solomon get to be queen, or he has to pick the favorite of them all and listen to the arguments throughout the entire time because she's the favorite. Nor did whoever had the first son end up getting the title, because there was numerous times in which there was infighting and war, and you did not know who the next king was going to be until all the dust settled on what was happening. So, just because you had the firstborn son doesn't mean you're going to be the one whose son rules. So, like many areas, ancient Israel and Judah had the method of using a queen mum. Now, some of you who've been around for a while might know about a queen mum, which is usually called a queen mother, but as the only queen mum we've had in, as far as I know, my lifetime, is Queen Elizabeth's mother. I just naturally say that because that's how they called her that. Now, in England, it's not a tradition to have the queen mother be a role, because the king only gets one wife, but Elizabeth's mother name is also Elizabeth. So therefore, to stop the confusion of this is Queen Elizabeth, the widow of the former king, versus this is Queen Elizabeth, the ruler of the country, she just went by Queen Mother for about 50-some years of her life. So, why? It was just a title used to make it easier to tell all the Elizabeths apart. In England, in the Old Testament, during the kingdoms, that was not the case. However, there is one good argument that quite often, if you're talking about this title, a Protestant will bring up, of Queen of Heaven is a title in the Bible. You can Google search for, Bible Queen of Heaven, and it will bring up things. Largely Jeremiah, chapter 7, verse 18, and Jeremiah 44, 17 through 19, and 25. So, who's the Queen of Heaven in the Bible story? I will read the first one because the rest are more of the same. So, the children gather wood, and the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead dough to make cakes to the Queen of Heaven, and to offer libations to strange gods, and to provoke me to anger. So, they have a very legitimate argument. The title Queen of Heaven is in the Bible. The title Queen of Heaven in the Bible is for a goddess. I've read different commentaries and notes on Bibles. Some of them say that this is referring to Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess who, if you're online, you heard all about during Easter time, because there are those people who insist that The Babylonian goddess is where we get the name for Easter, even though pretty much every country between modern England and the Americas in what was ancient Babylon use a word for Easter that relates from it being Passover. But I've also heard the idea that what they could be referring to is worship of the moon, which makes sense. The king in the heavens, as in the space around Earth, is going to be the sun, because that's the star during the day, but at night we have the lesser but still important light of the moon. In either case, whatever false god they are worshipping, just because this title is used there doesn't mean it's, in all cases, in every way, what that means. For example, it might be the moon, because if you read back in Genesis, when it talks about making the two lights, you'll notice it doesn't name sun and moon, even though it's quite obvious that's what it's referring to, because it didn't want people confused with the fact that we worship the moon, and the name for the moon is the name of the moon that we worship, versus it's a lesser light. So, anyway, it was used here to point out the negative of them worshiping a false god, but it's not saying this word forever is now ruined. If this word forever is now ruined, then we're going to have to rename the days of the weeks and the months and pretty much any other word that we use that's been around for more than a few thousand years, because they're all named after, ancient pagan gods or ancient pagan other things. But back to where we can go in the Bible to point out Queen of Heaven is a title that, yes, in Jeremiah, it was a negative. They were worshiping a false god. But that doesn't mean that that title is ruined forever. It's going to be 1st and 2nd Kings. Now, first, if you look through any of the list of kings in 1st and 2nd Kings, it's going to note that so-and-so became the king, and his mother was this. But the best example for the king's queen is his mother can be found in the story of Bathsheba in 1 Kings. So the first one is 1 Kings 1:16. And this is a Dewey Reams. It uses Old English. In this case, when they say the word worship, they mean like how if you were in a court in England, the judge is your worship, versus in America where it's your honor. They mean the same thing in the Old English meaning. They do not mean worship as in giving worship to God-like things. It simply means honor. Respect. Similar. Alright, so Bathsheba is going into the royal court of her husband, David. Bathsheba bowed herself and worshipped the king, and the king said to her, "What is thy will?" You have to follow court protocol, which can be seen in the same chapter when the prophet Nathan shows up in verse 22 through 23. As she was yet speaking with the king, Nathan the prophet came, and they told the king, saying, "Nathan the prophet is here." And when he had come in before the king and had worshipped, bowing down to the ground, Nathan said, and then what he was going to say. So, both the prophet, who is important enough that he can get an audience with the king, and the king's wife treat the king in the same way, and in a way that you would expect someone seeing the king to do so. You're a subject of the king, you get in his presence, you bow down, say "my liege" or other such things, and then either at a predetermined time or when he gives you permission, you then stand up depending on the exact rules of your country. Now, we can compare this with one chapter later, when her son is the king. And this is Adonias coming to Bathsheba and trying to get something from her son, the king, through her. And then he said, "I pray thee speak to King Solomon, for he cannot deny thee anything, to give me Azbig the Sulamite as wife." And Bathsheba said, "Well, I will speak for thee to the king." Then Bathsheba came to King Solomon to speak to her for a night, and Adonias. Not good with Old Testament names. And the king arose to meet her and bowed to her and sat down upon his throne, and a throne was set for the king's mother, and she sat on his right hand. And she said to him, I desire one small petition of thee. Do not put me to confusion. And the king said to her, My mother, ask, for I must not turn away thy face. So, king's wife, bow down, get treated the same way as anyone with enough ranking to be in the king's presence does. Mother, she shows up because everyone else knows the king will do what she asks. When she shows up, instead of having to bow down to him, he stands up to meet her and then bows to her, and she gets her own throne in the throne room for the rest of their conversation. So, Old Testament kingdoms, such as the kingdom of David, which we just went through more in depth, the queen is the mother of the king. Therefore, the logical New Testament conclusion is that Jesus sits on the throne of his father David, as it says many times in the New Testament. So, as his throne is in heaven, the person who is then the queen of the heavenly kingdom is Mary, his mother. Now, as you and I know, if you're watching this as a fellow Catholic, this does not mean she is a god. This does not mean that she has power equal to him. Simply the fact that the proper title for the mother of the king, according to the Bible, is the queen. Therefore, she is the queen of heaven, not because she's amazing and awesome in her own right, but because she is the mother of the king, who is Jesus, who is the king of heaven. So, next time you have some well-meaning friend or family member who points out that in the Bible, the Queen of Heaven is a negative title. In the Bible, the Queen of Heaven is the title of a false idol that they are worshiping, and God is angry about this. Tell them, yes, you're totally correct. That exact title used at that time and place was negative. Then ask them, so is Jesus the King of Heaven? If the answer is yes, according to the Bible, Mary is the Queen of Heaven.